You are absolutely incompetent. How many times do I have to tell you not to touch my things? You're fired! Get out of my house now!
Who gave you permission to touch that? The voice slices through the rain, cold and commanding. Amara freezes, the bow still trembling mid-air. The last note she played, delicate, shimmering, hangs between them before vanishing into the silence. She turns slowly toward the doorway. Elias Vane stands there, drenched from the storm, his tailored coat half unbuttoned, the city's drizzle dripping from his hair onto the marble floor. His pale eyes, a gray so sharp they almost look silver, are fixed on her hands, on his violin, as if she were holding his dead brother's bones. I was just... Amara stammers, her voice barely a whisper. Just what? His words hit like thunder. Breaking rules? Touching things that don't belong to you? The room hums with tension. He takes 2 steps forward, then 3 more, his shoes clicking against the marble. Amara's breath shortens. She sets the violin down gently on the velvet stand, hands shaking. I didn't mean to, sir. The door. It was open, and I heard... He cuts her off with a sharp laugh. Dry. Humorless. You heard? You think this is a museum? You think I pay you to listen? His anger feels too deep for the situation, as if she's broken something sacred. I'm sorry, Mr. Vane, she whispers, eyes downcast. Sorry doesn't untouch it. His voice drops to a growl. You're done here. Her heart plummets. Sir, please. But Elias turns away, his tone final. Security will see you out. Pack your things. The bow in her hand slips, landing on the floor with a soft click. The moment is over. She stands alone in the grand, echoing vault. The air still warm from the sound she created, the sound that cost her everything. 3 days earlier. The Orion Tower loomed over the city like a shard of frozen light. Inside its penthouse lived Elias Vane, a man whispered about in magazines and boardrooms alike. They said he could make or destroy fortunes with a single call. They also said he hadn't smiled in 7 years. Amara Fields first saw the building from the bus window, clutching her worn leather bag and a paper from the agency that read, Domestic Staff, Private Residence. She had cleaned apartments before, but never a palace like this. When she arrived, the head housekeeper, a woman named Beatrice Lang, greeted her with a clipped tone. You'll do the night shifts. Kitchen, library, and upper hall. Don't wander. And whatever you do, she pointed up the spiral staircase. Stay out of the vault room. The vault? Amara asked. Beatrice's lips tightened. He keeps his violin there. Don't even look inside. Amara nodded quickly. Of course. That first evening she worked quietly, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floors. The penthouse was a museum of cold beauty. Gray marble, black leather, silver frames, not a single photograph of family or laughter, only glass and silence. From the library, faint music drifted through a vent. Elias was watching old recordings, himself, younger, performing on stage. The music was exquisite, passionate. Amara paused, broom in hand, listening. Her heart ached. She hadn't held a violin in years, not since her mother died, and the lessons ended. But she still remembered every curve, every vibration that felt like home. When the recording stopped, the silence pressed down again, heavy as snowfall. That night, when she reached the kitchen, another maid, Sophia, a sharp-tongued blonde, leaned against the counter scrolling on her phone. You're the new one, Sophia said. Quiet type, huh? Amara smiled faintly. "I just like to focus on work," Sophia smirked. "You'll need to. Mr. Vane doesn't like mistakes. Fired a chef last month for overcooking salmon." Amara frowned. "He must care a lot about details." "Details?" Sophia scoffed. "He cares about control. Everything here belongs to him, even our silence." Amara said nothing. But that night, as she mopped the empty hallway, she caught sight of the vault door. Tall, glass, and faintly lit from within. She could almost hear something beyond it, a faint hum, like strings vibrating in memory. 2 nights later, Elias descended the stairs while Amara polished the marble by hand. He passed her without a glance. His presence was ice, precise, detached. But she saw it. The weariness beneath his eyes, the faint tremor in his fingers as he adjusted his cufflink. He paused at the door of the vault, unlocked it with a keycard, and stepped inside. A faint light spilled out, warm, golden. For the first time, Amara glimpsed the violin on its pedestal, glimmering beneath glass. The sound that followed was heartbreak itself. Elias began to play, softly, almost as if afraid of his own touch. The melody rose and fell, delicate, mournful. Then abruptly he stopped. His hand trembled. He put the violin down and left the room, jaw clenched, not noticing Amara in the corner. He never saw the tear that escaped her eye. The storm arrived the next evening. The rest of the staff left early. Amara stayed behind, finishing the upper floors. Wind howled against the windows, lightning slicing the sky. When she passed the vault, she found the door ajar. She hesitated. Inside, the violin gleamed, a quiet, impossible temptation. She knew she shouldn't, but the yearning was too strong, a pulse she hadn't felt since childhood. She stepped inside. The air was cool, scented faintly of cedar and varnish. She touched the bow. Then, almost without realizing, she lifted the instrument to her chin. The first note came out trembling, uneven, then steadier. She played a melody she used to perform at her mother's bedside, soft, sorrowful, like a lullaby for the forgotten. The room came alive with sound, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Her eyes closed. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every emotion she'd buried, poverty, loss, loneliness, poured into each stroke. And that's when the door opened. Elias stood there, the storm behind him, face unreadable. Her heart stopped. The bow froze mid-air, and his voice, sharp as thunder, said the words that would change both of their lives. "Who gave you permission to touch that?" The rain roared against the glass walls, but inside the vault, the silence was louder. Amara stood trembling, the violin now resting on its stand as though it, too, feared Elias's wrath. His chest rose and fell heavily, his eyes locked on her like a hawk on prey. "Do you have any idea what this is?" he asked finally, his voice low but dangerous. She swallowed. "It's a Guarneri. From the 18th century. I've read about it." That answer only made his jaw tighten. "Then you should know it's worth more than your entire life." Amara flinched. "I never meant—" "You never meant?" Elias cut her off, stepping closer. "You violated direct orders. You walked into a restricted room and touched something sacred." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Sacred. And Amara caught it, a note of pain buried under fury. She tried to steady her voice. "I only wanted to hear how it sounded." The door was open and— "Enough!" he snapped, the echo bouncing off marble and glass. "You're fired." Her throat tightened. "Please, sir, I need this job. My rent." You should have thought of that before trespassing. For a moment, she saw something human flicker in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe pity, but it vanished. He turned his back on her and strode toward the door. "Beatrice will handle your final payment," he said coldly. "Leave the key card at the front desk." And just like that, she was dismissed. By midnight, the rain had stopped. Amara sat on the edge of her small apartment bed, staring at her hands. The same hands that had touched that perfect wood, drawn sound from it like a prayer. Her roommate, Darlene, a nurse with tired eyes and a big heart, walked in holding 2 steaming mugs. "Got off early," she said softly. "You okay? You look pale." Amara forced a smile. "Lost the job," Darlene frowned. "Already? What happened?" Amara hesitated, then whispered, "I touched his violin." Darlene blinked. "His what now?" "He's a musician. Was, I think. I heard him play once. It was beautiful. But he keeps it locked up, like he's afraid of it." Darlene set the mugs down. "And you couldn't resist, huh?" Amara nodded, ashamed. "I just wanted to remember what it felt like." "To play," her friend sighed, but smiled faintly. "You've got something special in you, girl. Maybe the world keeps testing you, 'cause it knows you'll pass." Amara laughed weakly. "Right now it feels like I failed." "Maybe not," Darlene said. "Sometimes losing one door opens another. Maybe this one'll lead to a stage instead of a kitchen." Amara didn't believe that. Not yet. But in the quiet that followed, she hummed the melody she had played earlier, the one that had gotten her fired. And for a moment, the world didn't feel quite as cruel. The next morning, Elias stood in front of the same violin, guilt gnawing at his chest. The memory of that melody, her melody, wouldn't leave him. He had intended to forget her instantly. But when he tried to play again, his fingers faltered. Every note sounded wrong. He stopped after barely a minute, pressing his hand to his forehead. Why couldn't he erase the sound she made? He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid trembling in the crystal. From the window, the skyline stretched endlessly, indifferent to his turmoil. "You're losing control," he muttered to himself, over a maid. But it wasn't her, not entirely. It was what she awakened. The ghost of music. The ghost of Daniel. He closed his eyes, remembering the last concert with his younger brother. Daniel had been nervous. Elias had been perfectionist, demanding, cruel even. When Daniel missed a note during rehearsal, Elias's scolding had cut deep. That night, Daniel went on stage alone, and never came off alive. A year later, Elias sold his Stradivarius and locked the Guarneri away. He vowed never to play again. Not until he could forgive himself. But he never did. And now, somehow, a maid's trembling song had reopened the wound he'd sealed with arrogance. Beatrice entered quietly. "Sir, the replacement for Miss Fields has arrived." Elias didn't look up. "Send her away," Beatrice blinked. "Sir, cancel the hire. I don't need another maid." Beatrice hesitated, then nodded and left. Elias turned to the violin again, staring at it as though it mocked him. "You think she was special, don't you?" he murmured bitterly. "Don't lie to me. You miss her touch." The silence that followed felt like an answer. Meanwhile, Amara walked through the rain-soaked city streets, clutching a flyer that had fallen near her feet. Metropolitan Music Outreach. Annual Talent Fundraiser Gala. Open auditions. Finalists would perform live for donors and press. Her pulse quickened. It was insane. She hadn't performed publicly in years. but the words on the paper felt like a challenge, or maybe a whisper from the universe. Play again. She borrowed a violin from a community center the next day. It was scratched and out of tune, but when she pressed the bow to the strings, it was like oxygen flooding her lungs. Days turned into weeks. She practiced until her fingers blistered. Darlene would watch, leaning in the doorway, saying softly, "Girl, that billionaire's gonna regret letting you go." Amara smiled. "He won't even remember my name." But the music had started to remember her. Across the city, Elias sat in his penthouse with the television muted. A newscaster's words scrolled across the ticker. Metropolitan Gala to feature rising violinist. Former domestic worker's inspiring story. He almost didn't notice the photo until he did. Her face, Amara Fields. His hand froze halfway to his glass. The article headline glowed against the screen. From Maid to Maestro, the hidden talent discovered in a Manhattan penthouse. Something inside him twisted. Anger? Guilt? Awe? He couldn't tell. But one thought burned clear through the fog of emotion. He had fired her for touching the violin, and now the world would hear her play it. Not his, but hers. The night of the gala arrived like a storm dressed in silk. Gold chandeliers glittered over a sea of tuxedos and champagne glasses. The Metropolitan Opera Hall pulsed with quiet power. Billionaires, socialites, and critics murmured in anticipation. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, violins were being tuned, the air vibrating with nerves and wealth. Elias Vane adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped through the grand entrance. His reflection caught in the mirrored walls, the perfect image of composure. Tailored black suit, silver tie, jawline sharp enough to slice glass. Yet beneath the perfection, his pulse thudded. He told himself he didn't come to see her. He came because one of his investors had insisted. "You'll want to hear this girl," they'd said. "She's remarkable. A maid turned musician. What a story." He hadn't planned to care, but now every echo of a violin string made his stomach tighten. "Mr. Vane!" a voice called. He turned. It was Margot Ellison, chairwoman of the board, elegant, icy, and shrewd. "Didn't think you'd show," she said, smiling. "Still pretending you hate music?" Elias gave a tight smirk. "Music and I are on complicated terms." Margot's brow arched. "You'll like tonight's performer. Raw talent, they say. Self-taught. One of those rare souls who plays from pain." He swallowed hard. "What's her name?" She smiled. "Amara Fields." The name hit him like a chord plucked in the dark. Familiar and haunting. He masked the reaction with a sip of champagne. But the glass trembled slightly in his hand. Margot didn't notice. She was already turning to greet a senator. Elias found a seat near the back, half hidden in shadow. The stage glowed softly in front of him, golden light pooling around an empty music stand. The orchestra's hum faded. The host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's final performer, Miss Amara Fields." She stepped onto the stage like someone walking into her own dream. Her dress was deep navy, simple, elegant, hugging her figure in a way that spoke of quiet dignity rather than glamour. Her curls were loose now, haloed by the stage lights, and in her trembling hands, a violin borrowed but shining with care. The audience stirred, curious, intrigued. Somewhere in the back, Elias's breath caught. It was her, not the quiet maid who once polished his floors. Not the trembling woman he'd scolded. This was someone transformed, a creature of light and pain and strength. Amara took her place, eyes scanning the hall. She didn't see him, not yet, but part of her hoped he was there. Not for vengeance, for witness. The conductor nodded. The hall fell silent. Then, the first note. It wasn't perfect. Her bow quivered, but the tone was alive, a sound both fragile and defiant. She played a piece she'd written herself. The House of Glass. It began with a whisper, the melody delicate as memory. Then it grew, swelling with heartbreak, trembling with the ache of forgiveness. Each movement painted her story. The loneliness of cleaning empty halls, the wonder of forbidden sound, the sting of being cast aside, and the courage to return anyway. The audience leaned forward, spellbound, her eyes closed as she played, tears slipping down her cheeks unnoticed. The music poured out of her, unguarded, raw. Every note carried her mother's voice, every crescendo her lost dreams, every silence the echo of Elias's cruelty and her refusal to let it define her. When the final note came, it lingered in the air like smoke, delicate and endless. Then, stillness. No one clapped, not yet. They were too stunned. Then the applause erupted, thunderous, overwhelming. People rose to their feet, shouting her name. Amara blinked in disbelief, breathless. Her hands shook, her bow trembling. She had never imagined this. This sound of the world finally seeing her. And in the back row, Elias stood frozen, heart pounding like he was 20 again, hearing his brother play for the first time. His vision blurred. The melody she had played. It was the same fragment he used to hum to Daniel as a child. Somehow, impossibly, she had found it. He felt it like a confession from the universe. After the performance, Amara waited backstage, clutching the violin to her chest. The other musicians congratulated her, their words kind but distant. No one could quite understand the storm inside her. She turned when she heard the door open. Elias stood there, alone. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "You came." He nodded. "I didn't plan to." "Neither did I," she said softly. "Not here." He stepped closer, his voice rough. "You played something I haven't heard in years. That melody, where did you learn it?" She frowned. "I didn't. It just came to me one night." Elias stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "My brother used to play it. He died before finishing it." His voice cracked, raw and small. "You finished it tonight." Amara's lips parted. "I didn't know." He gave a hollow laugh. "No one could have. But when you played it, He stopped, unable to finish. His eyes glistened. "I was cruel to you. I thought you were just another rule to enforce. But you reminded me of everything I buried." Amara said nothing. Her heart ached for him. Not as a man, but as a broken musician trapped in his own silence. "I came to tell you," Elias continued, "that you were extraordinary, and that I'm sorry." She blinked. "Sorry doesn't change what happened." "No," he said quietly. "But maybe it changes what happens next." He reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a silver key. "To the vault," he said softly. "The violin is yours now," Amara gasped. "No, I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "Because it was never mine. I only kept it because I couldn't let go of the pain attached to it. You set it free." Their eyes met, hers wide with disbelief. his glistening with surrender. Somewhere behind them, applause echoed again for another performer. But in that quiet corner, the world seemed to pause. Elias smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in years. "You taught me that music doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those brave enough to play." Amara's hands trembled as she accepted the key. And for the first time, Elias Vane, the billionaire, the perfectionist, the ghost of the Orion Tower, bowed his head to someone who had once scrubbed his floors. But outside that room, whispers began to spread. Journalists were asking questions. Who was she? Why was he here? And what would happen when the story of the billionaire and the maid became tomorrow's headline? Because the world wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. The morning after the gala, Manhattan awoke to headlines that burned across every news feed. Billionaire Elias Vane seen applauding ex-Maid's violin debut. From fired to famous, Amara Fields steals the spotlight. Rumors swirl. Did the reclusive tycoon mentor his former housekeeper? The city feasted on the story. Talk shows speculated, blogs romanticized, and tabloids lied. Amara sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone as notifications poured in. The comments ranged from adoring to cruel. "She's incredible. Raw emotion. Pure magic. No way she did that alone. Probably another billionaire pity project. He fired her. Now he's claiming credit. Classic." Her hands shook as she turned off the screen. The attention felt unreal, blinding and sharp-edged. For a woman who used to pass invisibly through rooms, being seen by millions felt like standing naked under a spotlight. Darlene leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. "Girl, you broke the internet." Amara rubbed her temples. "I didn't want this. I just wanted to play." "Fame doesn't ask permission," Darlene said softly, "but it might open some doors for you." "You earned it, Amara." Amara gave a weak smile. "Maybe, but why does it feel like the story isn't mine anymore?" Across town, in the sterile expanse of the Orion Tower, Elias Vane sat before his wall of monitors, each displaying articles, photos, interviews, speculation. His name flashed beside hers like a stain he couldn't scrub away. Margot Ellison's voice crackled over the phone. "Elias, you need to make a statement. People think you discovered her. Or worse, that you're using her to fix your reputation." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I don't care what they think." "You should," Margot snapped. "Your investors care. The company's image matters." "I'm not making a statement," Elias said firmly. "She doesn't owe me anything. I owe her." Margot sighed. "At least issue a denial. Say you barely know her." He hesitated. "That would be a lie." A long pause. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elias. Don't let sentiment cost you your empire." He hung up without replying. The office went quiet. Rain began to streak down the glass walls. Again, the same rhythm as the night everything changed. Elias turned to the violin case sitting open on his desk, the one he had given her the key to. It looked oddly empty now, as if even the air inside missed her touch. He closed it slowly. By evening, the noise had reached a fever pitch. A major network offered Amara a televised interview. Her first instinct was to decline, but her mentor from the community center, Mr. Leon, convinced her otherwise. "Let them hear your story from your own mouth," he said. "Don't let them write it for you." So she agreed. The studio was bright and sterile, all powder and lights. The host smiled too wide, her voice sweet and probing. Amara Fields, the world wants to know, how does a housekeeper go from cleaning floors to captivating the metropolitan audience? Amara clasped her hands together. I didn't plan it, I just played what I felt. And Mr. Vane? The host pressed. Was he part of your journey? Many people say he discovered you. Amara's jaw tightened. No, he didn't discover me. He fired me. A ripple of surprise passed through the studio. The host blinked. Fired you? Amara nodded slowly. I played his violin once without permission. He said I had no right. Maybe he was right about that. But music doesn't belong to the rich. It belongs to the living. And that night, I was just trying to feel alive again. The audience fell silent. Cameras zoomed in on her face. Calm, radiant, unashamed. I don't hate him, she added softly. In some strange way, he set me free. His anger pushed me to remember who I was before the world told me I was small. The clip went viral overnight. Millions watched. Millions wept. Millions shared her words. But Elias didn't watch it on TV. He was there. He had slipped quietly into the studio audience, hidden beneath a dark coat, a baseball cap pulled low. He listened to every word, each one striking him like a bowstring snapping across his heart. When she said, "He set me free," something inside him broke. That night, he walked for hours through the city, the same streets she had once trudged home on after he fired her. He passed buskers playing under bridges, their cases open for coins, the city's heartbeat pulsing in their songs. He stopped at one, an old man playing an out-of-tune violin. The notes were wobbly but full of soul. "How long you been playing?" Elias asked quietly. The man smiled, toothless. "Since before I had regrets." Elias stared at him for a long moment, then dropped a folded check into the case. Blank, unsigned. "Write your own number," he murmured. The old man chuckled. "You rich folks think money fixes hearts?" "No," Elias said softly. "But maybe it buys the silence to listen to them again." 2 weeks later, an invitation arrived at Amara's door. Handwritten, no return address. "There's a gala at the Orion Tower next Friday. Come. Bring the violin. Play anything you want." Evie Amara stared at it for a long time. She didn't want to return to that place, the marble floors that had once felt like judgment. But something in her needed to. Not for revenge, not even for closure, for understanding. The night of the event, the tower glowed against the skyline like a lighthouse made of glass. Inside, the top floor had been transformed into a small concert space, intimate, candle-lit, not for publicity, but for truth. Amara entered quietly. She was the only performer. Elias stood by the window, staring out at the rain-drenched city. When he turned, she saw it immediately. He looked different. The sharpness was still there, but softened, like a blade dulled by use. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she replied. He gestured toward the center of the room, where a single chair and music stand waited. "Play something, anything." She hesitated, then nodded. She lifted the violin. His violin, the Guarnery he had given her the key to. The sound filled the space. Warm, haunting, beautiful. As she played, Elias closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't hear loss. He heard peace. When the final note faded, she lowered the bow. Why did you bring me here? He met her gaze. To say thank you. And goodbye. Her brow furrowed. Goodbye? He smiled faintly. I'm selling the tower. Moving to Vienna. Maybe I'll play again. Or maybe I'll just listen. Amara looked around the gleaming room, the symbol of his empire. You're giving it up? He nodded. You can't live among ghosts forever. They stood there in silence, two souls who had once destroyed and healed each other through a single melody. Then Elias said softly, Play one last song for me. And she did, this time not of sorrow, but of release. When the song ended, Elias whispered something only she could hear. Thank you for reminding me what living sounds like. And in that fragile, perfect moment she smiled, the same shy, tender smile that had once filled the coldest penthouse in Manhattan with light. But outside those glass walls, the world was still watching. The cameras, the gossip, the questions, what they didn't know was that tonight wasn't about scandal, it was about grace. The quiet kind that changes people when no one's looking. Morning seeped into the city like pale watercolor. Slow, deliberate, unassuming. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the streets slick and shimmering, every puddle catching fragments of skyline and sky. Amara woke to quiet. The violin case rested at the foot of her bed, still faintly resonant from the night before, as if it remembered the music she'd played for him. Her mind kept replaying it. The soft light, Elias's eyes closing, as if the sound had undone him, the way he said goodbye like an apology he'd been carrying for years. She didn't know how to feel. Grateful? Sad? Lighter? Maybe all at once. The world outside had already begun to twist the story. News outlets called it a secret reunion, a redemption concert. Someone had leaked a photograph. Her mid-performance, Elias in the background, his hand resting on the glass, face unreadable. It went viral again. Modern fairy tale, The Billionaire and the Maid. Rumored love affair rekindled? From power to penance, Elias Vane's mysterious farewell. She turned the phone face down and walked to the window. Below, the city kept moving, as indifferent and beautiful as ever. She whispered to herself, let them say what they want. They'll never understand what really happened. Elias, meanwhile, was packing. For the first time in 20 years, his penthouse looked human again. Half empty, imperfect, alive. The walls once lined with abstract art were now bare. The bookshelves were dismantled. Boxes filled the marble floor like punctuation marks in a long, ending sentence. He stood by the grand piano, her old cleaning cloth still tucked behind the lid, forgotten from the day she'd polished it. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. It smelled faintly of polish and rose soap. He smiled. Margot arrived, unannounced as usual. You're really doing this? I am. You built an empire in this tower, Elias. He shrugged lightly. And I lost myself in it. Margot crossed her arms. Vienna, of all places? Somewhere with quieter ghosts. She looked around the stripped-down room. You've changed? Elias gave a half-smile. So has she. Margot hesitated before speaking again. People are saying there's more between you two. He turned to the window, his reflection ghosting over the city. There isn't, he said softly. And there doesn't need to be. Sometimes you meet someone just long enough to remember who you were before the world hardened you. Margot studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then go find whatever peace you're chasing. As she left, Elias walked to the piano and sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys, uncertain, unsteady. Then, slowly, he began to play. A hesitant melody, almost fragile, but it grew, finding rhythm, warmth, depth. For the first time since his wife's death, Elias Vane filled a room with music again. 3 days later, Amara received another envelope. This one wasn't handwritten. It bore the seal of the Vane Foundation. Inside was a single letter and a check. For the Music Initiative Fund, to give forgotten voices a stage. No conditions, no credit, just creation. Evie, her breath caught. The amount was staggering, enough to transform the community center into a conservatory. She showed it to Mr. Léon, tears welling in her eyes. "He's leaving for Vienna." Mr. Léon smiled faintly. "Then let him go with grace. He's repaying a debt only his heart understands." Amara nodded. "Maybe it's not about owing anymore. Maybe it's about letting each other heal." She pressed the check against her chest, over her heartbeat. That weekend, she visited her mother's grave for the first time since the night she'd been fired. The cemetery was quiet, the wind cool against her face. She knelt, laying down a small bouquet of white lilies. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "I played for the world, and I forgave him." The air felt lighter then, like something invisible had been lifted. When she stood, she found herself smiling, not the kind born of happiness, but the kind that comes when a long ache finally ends. Vienna. Elias stepped off the train into the cool hush of an early spring morning. The station echoed with foreign voices and the distant sound of a violin somewhere in the square. He followed it, drawn like a man to a memory. A girl stood beneath an archway, bow dancing, the melody ancient and familiar. Elias closed his eyes. He didn't need to know her name. It was enough that the music still lived, that it kept finding people willing to give it breath. He dropped a coin in her case and said softly, in English, "Never stop playing." The girl smiled and replied in accented words, "Music never stops, sir. Only people do." Elias chuckled, turned his collar up, and walked into the morning. Weeks passed. Amara's name began to appear in concert listings, first small, then prestigious. Critics described her as the violinist who plays like she remembers pain but refuses to stay in it. She founded the Vane Fields Music Initiative, quietly naming it after both of them, though she never explained the reason. When reporters asked about Elias, she simply said, "He taught me one thing. Forgiveness sounds a lot like freedom." On a quiet night in Vienna, Elias sat alone at a cafe terrace. Snow fell in the distance. He opened a newspaper and froze. A headline read, "Amara Fields' first European tour announced, opening performance, Vienna." He smiled, small, knowing. He folded the paper, set down a few euros, and stood. Outside, the same cathedral bells that once tolled for Mozart rang through the cold air. He listened. Somewhere in the distance he imagined her warming up her bow, breathing in before the first note. He closed his eyes, and when she played, even an ocean away, he swore he could hear it. The same melody, the one that had changed everything. Some bonds aren't meant to be owned, only understood. Some stories don't end with love, they end with grace. The evening was velvet dark, stitched with the golden pulse of camera flashes and chandeliers. The Vienna Symphony Hall glittered with quiet anticipation, every seat filled, every whisper soft with reverence. At the center of it all stood Amara Fields, radiant in a flowing gown of muted silver, her hair cascading freely for the first time in years. No uniform, no label, no silence. She lifted her violin, the same one Elias once tore from her trembling hands, and drew the bow across the strings. The first note trembled like dawn, and just like that, the room exhaled. Her piece that night was new, something she had written in solitude, a requiem turned rebirth titled Forgiven Air. It began like morning, but bloomed into light. Every crescendo felt like a wound healing, every pause a breath after pain. Halfway through, as the orchestra swelled around her, she imagined him somewhere in the crowd. The thought came uninvited, but it softened her playing rather than breaking her focus. She didn't know if Elias was still in Vienna, or if he'd moved on as quietly as he'd promised. But the moment the final note hung in the air, fragile and perfect, something inside her whispered. He heard it. The audience rose as one. Applause thundered through the hall, echoing like waves crashing against marble. Amara bowed once, twice, then turned away, tears glittering against her lashes. Backstage, her hands shook from adrenaline and emotion. She barely noticed when her manager handed her a single envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said. "Said it was important," Amara frowned. "Who?" He didn't say, just an older man. British accent, maybe? Looked like he'd seen a ghost. She broke the seal. Inside was no letter, just a sheet of music paper. Yellowed, handwritten in neat ink. A melody. Familiar. At the top, "For the one who taught me to listen again." E.V. Her heart skipped. She knew the handwriting. It was his. Later that night, after the gala, Amara sat by the window of her hotel room, the lights of Vienna blinking beneath her like a city of stars. The letter lay open beside her, the faint scent of cedar and rain clinging to it. She took out her violin and began to play his melody. It was unlike anything she'd heard before, simple, haunting, full of longing. It spoke of distance, of regret, of gratitude so deep it hurt. The kind of music that only comes from a man who has loved something enough to lose it. Halfway through, she began to weep, but she didn't stop playing. Outside, down the street, a man paused beneath the glow of a cafe lamp. His coat collar was up, hat low. He looked up toward the sound that drifted from a high balcony. He smiled, just once, and then walked away. Months passed. Amara's fame spread far beyond Vienna. Paris, London, New York. Her name became synonymous with authenticity. Her performances described as music that forgives the listener. But she stayed grounded. She still visited schools, played for children who'd never touched an instrument before, and spoke softly about courage, humility, and second chances. Whenever she mentioned her inspiration, she never said his name, only that he had once shown her the cost of silence and the power of sound. Meanwhile, in a small cottage at the edge of Salzburg, Elias Vane lived quietly. He had traded the city's glare for a life of solitude and soil, tending to a vineyard that barely broke even but brought him peace. He still played sometimes, not for crowds, not for praise, just for the vines and the wind. Each morning, he read the newspapers that covered her triumphs, each headline more triumphant than the last. He never reached out. He didn't need to. But one evening, as the sun bled gold over the hills, he received a small parcel in the mail. No return address, Just his name, handwritten in looping, elegant letters. Inside was a note. For everything you gave without asking. For everything you took and then returned. The world finally hears you again, Elias. I hope you're listening, too. Beneath it, lay a vinyl record, unmarked except for a single title written in white ink. Forgiven Heir. Live at Vienna. He placed it on his old gramophone and lowered the needle. Static crackled. Then her violin bloomed from the speakers. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done, both the cruelty and the redemption. And in that sound, he found something that no boardroom, no fortune, no applause had ever given him. Peace. Weeks later, the press would catch wind of a mysterious foundation launched under Elias's name, the Lucien Vane Fellowship, dedicated to supporting children from underprivileged backgrounds who dreamt of studying music. When reporters asked Amara about it, she smiled softly. Lucien was his brother, she said. He never told anyone why he stopped playing. But maybe he's finally learned to start again. In a quiet epilogue of that same week, Amara performed a small concert at the foundation's opening ceremony. It wasn't grand, not televised, not even recorded. She looked out into the small audience. A few donors, some students, a handful of strangers. Her eyes paused on one man in the back row, seated alone, half in shadow. A faint smile curved her lips, but she said nothing. When she lifted her bow, her hands were steady, and when she began to play, he closed his eyes. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about the space that forgiveness left behind. The silence after music. The calm after pain. They didn't need words. The notes said everything. When the final note faded, she looked up. The chair was empty, but on it lay a single white rose, and beneath it, a note written in that same elegant hand. The music was never mine to keep. Thank you for giving it back to the world. That night, Amara stood alone under the hall's fading lights, violin in hand. The city hummed softly beyond the windows. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Goodbye, Elias," but what she meant was, "Thank you." The camera of memory would pull back then, past the hall, past the street, past the city, her melody rising, delicate and eternal, weaving its way into every open sky. It was the sound of two broken souls who had learned that the most beautiful notes are born from silence. The years slipped forward, like pages turned by a slow, tender wind. Autumn had returned to New York, the same city where everything began, where a frightened maid once held a forbidden violin, and a broken man mistook beauty for betrayal. But now, the city hummed with something gentler, as if its heartbeat had softened in time with theirs. The Vanefields Conservatory of Music stood in Harlem, sunlight spilling through its glass facade onto children laughing as they carried their instruments into class. Violins squeaked, flutes trilled, and laughter echoed down the tiled hallways. At the far end of a bright corridor hung a framed black-and-white photograph. It showed a young woman bowing before a grand audience, eyes closed, her expression serene. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Amara Fields, music that forgives the listener." And next to her portrait, a smaller photo, Elias Vane, smiling faintly, hands folded over a violin case. His plaque was simpler, a patron of second chances. Amara, now 34, walked through the conservatory's main hall, her steps unhurried, her curls loose and streaked faintly with copper in the sunlight. She wore a soft linen dress and no shoes. The children always said she taught best that way, her feet grounded to the rhythm of the earth. She stopped by a small practice room where a boy no older than 10 struggled with his bow hold. His fingers were stiff, his frustration visible. "Too much force," she murmured, stepping behind him. "Let the music breathe. You don't control it. You meet it halfway." He tried again, slower, gentler. The sound bloomed, a little uneven but warm. She smiled. "Better, you see? It's not about power. It's about trust." The boy grinned up at her. "Like you and your violin?" Amara chuckled softly. "Something like that." He tilted his head. "Did you ever meet someone who didn't trust the music?" Her eyes softened. "Once, but he learned." Later that evening, as dusk bled into gold across the windows, Amara sat alone in her office. The room was filled with the faint scent of resin and cedar. Her violin lay open beside her, its wood darkened by years of love and use. She poured tea, opened her notebook, and began to write. Not a melody this time, but a letter. "Dear Elias, the children played your melody today. They call it the song that feels like rain. You'd like that. I still play it sometimes when I'm alone. It changes every year, as if it grows older with us. They say time heals everything, but I think it's music that does. Time just gives us the silence to hear it. Wherever you are, I hope you're still listening. A." She folded the note carefully, placed it between the pages of an old composition book, and tucked it into her drawer. A quiet ritual, a way of keeping him close, without keeping him captive. Outside, the city lights flickered awake. Somewhere beyond them, she imagined a vineyard bathed in twilight. A man sitting under an olive tree, perhaps still listening to the faint echoes of her music. 2 months later, an envelope arrived at the conservatory. The return address was smudged, the handwriting slightly unsteady. It contained a single page. "Amara, I'm afraid this will reach you too late. My health has dimmed faster than I expected. But don't be sad. I found peace in the sound of your forgiveness. It filled all the silence I once feared. There's a key enclosed. It opens the vault beneath my old estate. You'll find something that was never meant to be locked away. Play it once more, for both of us." Elias, her breath trembled as she unfolded the small brass key taped to the bottom of the letter. A week later, Amara stood once again in the Orion Tower. The marble floors had lost their luster, dust veiled the grand piano, and sunlight filtered through gray drapes like tired ghosts of former glory. She found the door, the same one he'd once warned her never to touch. The vault. Her fingers hesitated only a second before turning the key. Inside, the air was cool, silent. The Guarneri violin sat in its glass case, untouched, almost reverent, and beside it, another object, a sealed glass frame containing 2 handwritten scores, Lucian's Sonata in E minor and Forgiven Air. Taped to the inside of the glass was a small note. Now, they belong together. Amara pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled, but they weren't heavy this time. They came like rain after long drought, soft and necessary. She opened the case and lifted the violin. It was lighter than she remembered, as if the years had stripped away its weight. Then she played. No audience, no cameras, just her, the room, and the ghost of a man who had finally learned to love again. The melody filled every corner, weaving through the dust and the light. When the final note faded, she whispered, "Rest, Elias." Years later, children at the conservatory would tell a story, how their founder once played a song so beautiful that even the walls listened. And on quiet evenings, when the city wind slipped through open windows, the staff swore they could still hear faint violin strains drifting through the halls. Soft, forgiving, eternal. In the final image, Amara stands before a new class of young musicians, the sunlight gilding her curls, the same Guarneri violin resting under her chin. Her bow rises. The first note blooms, golden and alive. And though the man who once silenced her is gone, his gift remains, the freedom to play, to forgive, to be heard.